All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome in, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Grace Corrigan, and I am the employment specialist at INCIGHT. And as you heard, we are recording this session. We ask that you keep your audio muted during the event just to eliminate any background noise. And if you would like to turn your camera on, that'd be great. We love to see smiling faces. And if you're not comfortable with that, that's fine too. And before we start, I'd like to share a little bit about INCIGHT. We're a nonprofit based here in Portland. We were founded back in 2004. And our mission is changing hearts and minds, leveraging obstacles, and unlocking potential. So we do this through our programs, education and employment programs. They both focus on helping individuals with disabilities and barriers. And we have other services also that we offer. And if you're interested in checking some of those out, you can go to our webpage, which is INCIGHT.org, or you can give us a call and we'll gladly fill you in on everything. Now, Jobs Now is part of our employment program. And one of the ways we connect with job seekers is through these GetAhead events. And these are standalone workshops that focus on helping individuals with disabilities and barriers. And we welcome people from all walks of life. And these are to give you additional tools and resources for your job search. So if you're interested in also viewing past GetAhead events, we've covered some great topics over the last couple of years. You can go to jobsnow.org and you can view any of those videos if you like. Now, INCIGHT also hosts in-person job fairs. And we are excited that we have a job fair coming up on Thursday, October the 26th at PSU. And I don't know if you're aware of it, but October is National Disability Employment Awareness Month, and it goes by NDEAM. And this event, or this month, we are going to help celebrate that. And our job fair is going to be geared towards celebrating this 50th anniversary. Now, our job fair will be open to people of all abilities. It's just that we want to focus on this aspect during this job fair. So I'll be sending out emails with the advertisement and the registration early October. And we'd love to have you join us. And if for some reason you don't get an email, you can always go to jobsnow.org and register there. So today our workshop is Stand Out with S.T.A.R. And we are honored to have Ruthie Ditzler with us today. She's a career coach with Talent Career Coaching, and she's going to be sharing some tips on how to better equip you to answer interview questions. So welcome, Ruthie. We're so glad to have you, and I will go ahead and hand it over to you now.
Awesome. Thanks, Grace. I'm excited to be here. And I love talking about S.T.A.R stories. So that's the theme for today. We're going to talk about how to use storytelling to ace your next interview. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Thumbs up, looking good?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So here's our agenda for today. Let me make sure that I'm not blocking you at all. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick introduction of myself, let you know why I'm here. Then we will talk about the S.T.A.R method itself and think about why it's one of the best bets for helping you ace your interview. We'll talk about some best practices, some tips and tricks for using the S.T.A.R method in interviews. I have a brainstorming tool that I'm going to show y'all and also share with you after the presentation is over. This can be really helpful for preparing for interviews ahead of time. We will have a special audience participation opportunity. So I always like to give participants of my Zoom calls the opportunity to practice. So if you, throughout the time that I'm talking, feel a burning desire calling to answer a S.T.A.R question at the end and get some feedback, This is a cool chance for everyone to benefit from the feedback that's given to one person. We'll do some Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, I'll make sure to address them before this is over. And then there's, for those of you who are interested in getting some more kind of hands-on practice, we will do some bonus breakout rooms at the end. So we'll finish up the Q&A. For people who want to stick around, you'll have the opportunity to pair up or be in some small groups where you can practice answering a behavioral interview question. In general, I love interacting with folks during calls like this, so please don't hesitate to raise your hand if you have a question. You can put it in the chat, which I'm sure Grace will help me monitor. And just generally, yeah, I want to be answering questions as they come up, so please don't hesitate to ask them. And then also use emojis, let me know how you're feeling, share in the chat, stuff like that. Okay, so who am I? My name is Ruthie, like I mentioned, and I am a coach with Talent Career Coaching. So we're a group of coaches that's focused on helping people do work they love, get paid what they're worth, and positively impact the world. And I, as a career coach, my focus is not only on helping people land jobs, but I want to help people land jobs that bring them fulfillment. And how I do that is working with clients to help them identify their natural strengths, identify transferable skills that they've learned throughout their career, and then leverage those things to pivot into roles they love. Because we all work a lot, and it's how awesome would it be if we could all be doing jobs that we absolutely love to do. So that's who I am. If you're interested in learning more about me or learning more about Talent Career Coaching, you can look us up at talentcareercoaching.com. Okay, so what is the STAR method? Really quick before we jump into that, I would love to see like a reaction, or you can put it in the chat. How many people get nervous when they have a job interview? How many people get nervous when they have a job interview? Yep, I'm seeing a few raised hands. I know it's one of the most nerve-wracking things for me that could ever happen in my entire life. Even though I'm someone who helps prepare people for job interviews, I get super, super nervous. Okay. Second question, how many people have rambled in an interview before? So by ramble, I mean they asked you a question and then you were like, oh, I don't really know how to answer this, but you get going on your answer. You start talking and then you realize, oh, maybe I should have answered this a different way, but it's too late because you're already talking. And so then you just sort of trail off, right? So yeah, I see a couple raised hands. I'm totally guilty of rambling myself. And a big part of it is because interviews they mean a lot to us, right? A job interview, there's a lot at stake. Typically, it's something we've worked really hard to get to that point, right? And so we can feel a lot of anxiety in our bodies. We're in fight or flight mode oftentimes. And so it can be easy to lose track of what you're saying, to repeat yourself, trail off when you're answering. And so the problem with that is if you ramble or you're trailing off in an interview, you risk coming across as an ineffective communicator and losing the engagement of the person who's interviewing you, right? So we don't want that to happen when we're interviewing, when so much of what we're trying to do is come off as, someone who's cool, calm, and collected and can totally handle the responsibilities of the job that we're interviewing for. Okay, so what is the STAR method? So this is a method of answering behavioral interview questions that helps you tell a story in the 4 easy steps. So STAR is an acronym for 4 different steps, and we're going to go into what each of those mean. And so this is these, using this easy to remember formula, you can prevent yourself from rambling, and you're focused on including key info that's relevant to the job you're interviewing for. You're going to be able to give a clear, concise answer that strategically highlights your skills while also helping your interview understand, how does this person think? How does this person behave? How does this person communicate? And what can I extrapolate about that for how they're going to show up in this position that I'm potentially hiring them for? So behavioral interview questions, first of all, it's like you're answering behavioral interview questions. What are those? So those are questions that start, you see them here on the screen, start with things like, tell me about a time when ... right? Tell me about a time when you dealt with a challenging customer. Tell me about a time when you had to juggle competing deadlines. Tell me about a time when you had a conflict with a colleague at work. Give me an example of how you handled competing deadlines. Give me an example of a time that you were an effective communicator. What do you do when you are faced with a challenging customer? So the interviewer is trying to move your answers away from hypothetical what ifs to something more tangible that actually happened, right? So they can really understand more about you. They're looking for insight, like I said, into how you might act if that same situation happened again while you were working for them. Okay. So when we're thinking about moving from hypothetical to tangible, here's an example. So an interviewer could ask something like, what do you think is important to improve workplace culture? And that really gives the interviewee this opportunity to kind of wax poetic about workplace culture and like, oh, well, this is what I think. And, something that really matters to me is, I really care about, working in an inclusive place. And, that's something that I've always worked towards advancing that in my previous roles. And it kind of lets the person talk, but it's not actually giving any proof of their experience. As opposed to moving to something more tangible, tell me about a time you did something to improve team dynamics, right? And this could be, well, we had a new colleague come on board and I noticed that, they were not being included in team meetings, and so I did X, Y, and Z to make sure this person felt more included. And as a result, there was more team cohesiveness. Okay. So the difference is that you're actually giving the right information, you're actually giving concrete actions that you took. And the thing with the STAR method is that many recruiters and hiring managers are familiar with this method. And so it's a great thing to know because they might actually be during the interview, they might have that acronym sort of written down on a piece of paper, and they're checking that they're understanding each of the steps in your story when you're answering a question. Okay. So what does STAR stand for? Here are the 4 steps, and we'll go into these in more detail in the next slide. But STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. Okay, situation, task, action, results. And Jim, I see you still have your hand up. I want to make sure, I think that was from before when I asked the question. There we go. Okay. Just wanted to make sure you didn't have a burning question. Okay. So what does situation, task, action, and result stand for? So first, you're going to set the scene. Okay. You're going to provide some context for the interviewer to set your story up. This could be information about where you were working, what your job title was in this moment of the example that you're using, who else was involved, were you working on a team? Were you dealing with something with a colleague? Were you working with a customer? Then you're going to talk about the task. So this is typically the problem or the challenge you were faced with. the responsibility that you had in this situation. What did you generally have to do here? Action is going to be the tangible, very specific actions that you took to resolve that problem or challenge that you were facing. And then you're going to sum it up. You're going to like put the bow on top of the present, basically, by highlighting the positive outcomes that you achieved by your actions. And we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail later on. But the important thing here, this doesn't have to be like super verbose. It doesn't have to be some, huge accomplishment. It can be as simple as we met our deadline. As a result of what I did, we met our deadline and our client was satisfied, right? So let me give you an example here of how I might answer a STAR question. So this is a really common question. Tell me about a time you handled a challenging situation. Okay, so here's an example. First, I'm going to set the scene and I'm going to provide a little bit of context about what was happening. So when I was working as a project manager for XYZ company, a website that I managed suddenly showed slow performance. And the problem was that I didn't notice this issue until a user reported it to management. Okay, so what was I facing here? What was my responsibility? As a project manager for that project, I took full responsibility for the problem and I got to work with the engineering team to find a way to resolve it quickly. Okay. Then I'm going to move into what I did specifically. Okay. So first I researched a new plugin we had recently installed, and I determined that that was causing the slowdown. So after notifying the engineering team, I ensured that a mistake like that didn't get repeated in the future by setting up email alerts to notify myself when website behavior exceeds set thresholds. I also put an application management tool in place. I made the effort to learn the tool myself, and then I shared my learnings with other project managers at my company in a brown bag session. Okay, so I researched, I notified, I put a tool in place, right? These are like the specific actions that you took. So as a result, the positive outcome. So after resolving the initial issue and with my new precautionary measures in place, we're able to show consistent page load times of less than 3 seconds. And I learned the importance of monitoring all aspects of the website, not just the new features I was spending my time on. Okay, so what do we know about me here through this answer? Anyone have any ideas and want to put it in the chat? What do you, like, if you had just met me and I answered this question this way, what are some things that stand out to you? Any ideas? Amy says, you are proactive in preventing future issues. Totally. Right. So not only did I resolve the initial issue, which was the website slowdown that I hadn't noticed before, but I also was like, I don't want this to happen again. I'm going to ensure that I don't make this mistake. And here's what I'm going to do by installing this new tool. And beyond that, I'm going to make sure other people in my same company don't make that mistake either, because I'm going to teach them what I learned. Lisa says, effective and willing to take responsibility. Totally. So at the beginning, right, I admitted to the fact that I made a mistake, right? It was my project, it was my responsibility, and I didn't actually notice that this issue came up until a customer told management, and that's a pretty icky situation to be in, right? You don't want that to happen at work. But I was like, this was my problem, I took responsibility for it and moved forward. Yeah, Marina, you jumped into resolving an issue right away, right? Natalie, you used data in your answer. Nice. That's a really good point too, because, and we'll talk about this in the next slide, just kind of thinking about tips, but it's like this answering in a STAR question is such a good way to inject little, here's a skill that I have, right? Here's another thing that I know how to do, right? I leveraged my Salesforce knowledge, or I was able to create a data set and manipulate it in Excel, or whatever it is that might be relevant to the job that you're applying for, you can include all of those skills in your answer. And then it's like seeing those things in action. Yeah, modeled integrity and initiative for the other project managers. Yep, great. Okay, so that's an example of the power of the STAR story, right? So let's talk about this, some tips and tricks, and this will come up also here. So tips and tricks, kind of some best practices. Don't rush, okay? I didn't time myself when I answered that question. I don't know if y'all have a feel for how long it took for me to answer, but the point here is this is your opportunity because you're telling a story. It tends to be engaging for your listener. And you have the opportunity here to go into detail about specific things that you did. When we're nervous in an interview, I know for myself, I normally just want to be like, blah, and like get to the end of my answer. But, take a minute, 2 minutes, even 3 minutes if it's a really complex situation that you're talking about. Or sometimes the interviewer might ask a follow-up question for you to go into more detail. But this is your opportunity to showcase those skills and character traits. So don't lose that opportunity. Okay. Another important thing here is to use I statements, mainly in the action portion of your answer. Okay. This can be tricky because sometimes you'll be telling a story about something you worked on with a team, right? So I used to work at a coding boot camp, and so often the students were completing projects together. And when it came time to give examples and STAR stories, it felt weird because it's sort of like, I don't want to take credit for someone else's work, but we were working on this together. But the key is to pull out your key contributions, right? Even if it's a group work environment, you are still taking action and you are still contributing specific things, separate from what your other teammates are doing. So, I was working on a team of developers that was building out a new feature, and we had a deadline that was quickly approaching. And at the last minute, there was a bug in our code and nothing worked, right? We were worried, oh my God, we're not going to be able to deliver this to the client. Okay, so that's the scene. I'm on a team. Okay. But then you can say, I called the team together for a meeting to delegate responsibilities. I suggested that a colleague and I stay late and work together to resolve the issue. I researched additional documentation that helped us pinpoint what was going wrong, right? And then after your I did this, after a long night, we found the issue in our code and we were able to get things back up and running. We met our deadline and our client was satisfied with the new feature. Okay. So in that story, you're still acknowledging the fact that you were part of a group, you worked with other people, but you're also highlighting those specific things that you contributed. Okay. I talked about this briefly before, but the STAR story, this answer is an opportunity for you to showcase both technical and soft skills, especially as they relate to the job description, to the job that you are applying for, that you're interviewing for, right? So we'll go over this in a bit when we're thinking about how do you strategize and like what story should you use to answer. But generally, you should always refer back to the job description that you applied for, because that's what they're interviewing for. Those are the skills they want to see in action. Okay. The number 4, brag about yourself in the third person. So what I mean by that is I think interviewing is super awkward for a lot of us, myself included. I know I always feel really awkward talking about my accomplishments, and we live in a society that kind of teaches people not to brag. But what's great about STAR stories is rather than saying, I'm great with customers, you can share a story about how you provided excellent customer service, including the specific steps that you took that provided that personal touch. right? So you're not saying, I'm the best. You're demonstrating how you're the best fit for the position. And so it can alleviate some of that awkwardness that I think folks tend to feel because you're sort of proving it and you're talking about yourself, and it's not directly in third person, but it's as if someone else was sort of singing your praises. I would encourage you to, where it says take it from general to tangible, you can use the STAR method even in situations where you weren't asked one of those, tell me about a time when, or give me an example of questions. So for example, an interviewer might say something like, how do you handle juggling multiple deadlines? And, you could say, pretty good. I'm really good at that. I can do it. I'm great. And that's sort of one of those things where you're like, okay, hypothetically, whatever, we still don't have any proof here, but it was sort of the format of the interviewer's question that led you on that path. But instead of going that route and giving a hypothetical answer, you can change it to the STAR format and you can give a concrete example of a time that you excelled while you were juggling deadlines, right? Just turn it into a story. Okay. Number 6, focus on positive outcomes. Okay, this part is important. The result part of your STAR answer is where you kind of wrap it up and you make the biggest impact. It's what your interviewer is left remembering about you in that situation. So you should always try to end with a positive outcome. If the example doesn't paint you in a good light, or you can't demonstrate coming up with a solution to the problem that you were faced, then pick a different example. Okay. And that leads right into number 7, which is the importance of preparing your answers ahead of time. Okay. So you don't want to be caught in this moment where you're thinking of an answer on the fly and then you're like, oof, like actually, I had this interaction with the customer and like didn't really end that well. Whoops. Okay. That's not great. So you want to prepare your answers ahead of time. We're going to go into more detail about this in just a second. And then number 8, the most important thing is to practice, and to practice talking out loud. Okay. You win by being prepared. Most people think about their answer to an interview question in the exact moment that they're asked the question. Okay. So you can stand out from other candidates by actually taking the time to prepare your answers, to think about them ahead of time, and to practice. Okay. And that gives you the added bonus of alleviating some of that anxiety. You're already going to be feeling stressed and anxious because it's an interview. So do what you can to set yourself up for success. You need to be able to hear yourself talk through the answer to be able to determine how long your answer is, if you can make it stronger by modifying your language or including different details. So a couple ideas, you can find a friend or a family member to conduct a mock interview with you. You can easily Google, like behavioral interview questions and give that person a list of questions they can ask you. And then you can practice running through those questions. If you don't have someone around, you can log on to Zoom, you can start a Zoom meeting, and you can record yourself, right? You just hit record like we're doing for this session, and then you can watch it back and you can hear how you sounded and say, oh, wow, like I should probably not say like so much when I'm talking, or that example actually didn't go over very well. Like, let me try a different thing. So those are a couple options. Whether you're with someone or on your own, you can find a way to hear yourself and practice out loud. Okay, so what do we do to practice? And I think we have enough time. I'll show you the worksheet. So STAR stories is the idea behind this is you want to put together a toolkit of stories that address common themes that come up in interviews. Okay. So this is you'll have thought of these ahead of time, and you'll be able to kind of reference this document that I'm going to share with you. And then you have those ready to use, and you can modify them depending on the question you're asked. So for example, on the screen here, you can see problem solving is a really common theme that interviewers want to know about. The question I answered earlier was, tell me about a time when you handled a challenging situation. But there could be they could phrase it differently, right? There could be a question, tell me about a time when, something didn't go well, a project that you were working on didn't go well. Or, there's so many different ways that a question can be phrased that's getting at this general skill set. Okay. And this is a great way to just say, like, okay, I'm gonna write down some examples here. I'm gonna think through, like, what is an example of a time when I had to solve a problem? And so what this worksheet has is a space for you to really detail everything out. Okay. The situation, the task, and then the action and results. Okay. And what I like about it is that it's giving you some ideas here about how to make those, to synthesize the results, your impact in that situation, in like really specific ways. So let me just pull this up really quick so that y'all can see and I'll share this link with Grace afterwards, and Grace, you can feel free to share it out with people. So what I did is I put together some 10 kind of common themes. So problem solving we talked about, but other things like time management, right? That was like, how do you juggle competing deadlines? Conflict resolution is a huge one. Just generally like communication, leadership, adaptability. Those are all going to be important things to think about ahead of time. And so then in this document, there's a page for each. There's an example question for each of those themes. So you can go through and think about how to map those out. And then at the end, there's a few blank tables where you can just work on any question that you'd like to. So the advantage here is like, even just taking the time to plan this out and think it through and kind of think about how you're going to phrase things is such an important part of preparing for an interview, because you can also be thinking, okay, what exactly are they looking for? What are the skills? What are the qualifications? And you're finding those strategic ways to include that in your answers. Okay. So I'm going to make sure that, I know that this company I'm interviewing for, a big part of one of their key values is accountability. And so in my story about a time I made a mistake and what I learned for it, I can demonstrate that I'm someone who's accountable for my actions, and I'm going to take responsibility for the mistakes that I make. Okay. So that then my interviewer, when they have sort of like their checklist of what do I need in a good candidate, in order to like move them to the next step in the interview process, they can be like, check, I know Ruthie's an accountable person. And that's something we really care about in the culture of this company. Okay. So I will share out that document. Let's see. Charlotte, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm trying to find where you put accountable in the values so that you can know that that's what you need to input. I don't see that.
Yeah, so that's a great question. That's actually what we're going to talk about on the next slide, right? So perfect,
okay.
because I didn't address that yet. So how do you know what they're going to ask you about, right? It can be
my question was, how do you put it in that spreadsheet or in that table that you just, okay.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So for me, I have to have everything visually all in one place. And so
Okay.
I was thinking that I would add a little place to put values into your chart that you already created. I'm not sure though.
I see. I mean, so this is something, when you get the link, you'll be able to make a copy of this and you can modify it however you'd like.
Okay.
So
I just wasn't sure if I hadn't seen it. So thank you so much for letting me know. Thank you.
oh yeah, you're welcome. Sure. Okay. Yeah, that was a great question. Okay, come on back. Here we go. Oops. Oops. Ooh. Okay. So how do you know what they're going to ask you, right? So it can be, obviously there are themes, there are, these common things that we might anticipate that someone's going to ask us in an interview, but how can we really, be smart about how we're planning out for the interview and preparing? How can we be strategic? So here's a couple of tips about how to think about, anticipate what an interviewer might be wanting to know. Okay. So here is the screenshot of the company values that are listed on a website. Okay, so this company is Atlassian. They're a tech company. And I just was like, I'm gonna just Google a random company, go to their values page and see what they said. And I love that they have some very kind of out there values. But what I'm going to do then as an interviewee, as I'm preparing for my upcoming interview, is I'm going to anticipate that the interviewer at Atlassian cares about some of these things. They're looking for someone who exemplifies these values. Okay. So what are some things that y'all see on this screen here that you would anticipate that an interviewer is looking for in a candidate? Can put it in the chat. What are some things on here that you would be considering if you were an interviewer? What would you be looking for? I'll give one example. So this one here, like, don't screw the customer, basically. Customers are our lifeblood. Without happy customers, we're doomed. So I can pretty much guarantee that they're going to be focused on learning about a time when they want to know what your customer service is like. They're going to want to know about a time when you went above and beyond to make sure that you satisfied a customer. And they're also considering the customer perspective, collective customer perspective. They're looking for empathy. They're looking for someone that has emotional intelligence and is able to put themselves, in someone else's shoes. Okay, a couple things in the chat. Brandy says, are you a team player? Right? They have this thing here, play as a team. They care about their team culture. We strive to put what's right for the team first. They identify that they spend a huge amount of their time at work. They care about their culture, but they're also going to care that you're someone that can collaborate with other people. Yep, demonstrated ability to work as a team. Natalie says, I'd want to know if they were innovative and proactive, a doer, right? So it sounds like this one in particular, be the change you seek, right? They want people who are going to take initiative. They want people who are striving for excellence, right? That there's that doer mentality that Natalie mentioned. Are you able to be resourceful to make positive changes? Yes, Vicky, good opportunity to share a story. Tell me about a time when you needed to push back, is what Amy is suggesting. Demonstrate courage to speak out for change, right? And so that's this open company, like no bull crap, how they care about like transparency, but they also want people who aren't afraid to speak up. So there's a lot here for you to prepare, okay? And if you're thinking in the mindset of a recruiter or a hiring manager, they're going to be rewarded for doing their job well when they hire candidates that advance a company's values, okay? So you're doing the recruiter or the hiring manager a favor if you can demonstrate to them that you're that person. And this is giving you so much good stuff to work with here. When it's a great jumping off point when thinking about how to prepare. And I would say that 99% of companies have something like this on their website, something that speaks to their culture, what's important to them, their mission. So you're going to start, how do you know what they're going to ask you? You're going to start with what the company shares about itself, what they share publicly about what they value. Okay. Second tip, how do you know what they're going to ask you? Oops, wrong direction. Second tip is to look at the job description. Okay. So when you're applying for a job, I highly recommend that you copy and paste that job description into a Google Doc, into a Word document, because sometimes what happens is you apply for a job, they take down the listing, and then you get called back for an interview. Okay. But the job listing it's like it's the keys for cracking the code for the interview, right? Because it's telling you exactly what they're looking for. So what skills and qualifications matter to them? Thinking about what stories might highlight certain skills that are going to help you stand out, or if there's a way that you can modify a story you came up with to better position you as a great fit. Okay. So just running through this really quick, this was just a random job listing I pulled off LinkedIn yesterday. And I dove in. This wasn't even sort of like the job responsibility part of it. This was just like, you have to have this. Okay. So there's a few things like soft skills here: ability to initiate and maintain positive working relationships with staff and other organizations. Okay. So that's both the collaborative, how do you work with a team internally, but also the sort of customer facing, how do you interact with other organizations, right? Can you represent us well? Understand the community serves, community connectedness. They're going to want to know about how you build rapport with people. This was an example. I think it was like a medical position. So there's going to be a lot of like back and forth with customers and clients. So that goes right into good communication skills. Can you demonstrate that you're empathetic? You know how to listen well, right? You can provide support, encouragement, and motivation. So this is just like chock full of all these different kind of keywords, key skills, key qualifications. And you can go back to that document and you're like, okay, when, I'm kind of thinking about different ways to position myself here, what's a good example of a time that I demonstrated my awesome communication skills? How can I illustrate that I was listening well? I was able to provide emotional support, encouragement, and motivation. And so you're not going to go directly to the interviewer and say, I'm great at these things. You're just going to help them understand that. You're going to connect the dots for them through the way that you answer the story. Okay. So now, no pressure. But if there is someone here, a participant who is interested in demonstrating or practicing this and would like to give it a shot in front of everyone, let's do it. This is a really awesome opportunity for people to learn from someone else and from the feedback that I'm going to share. Is there anyone that feels like they want to give it a shot?
Murray here.
I'd be willing.
I think I heard someone. I got to pull up the screen so I can see your face. Did someone say they're interested?
Yes, Maria Faye is signing right now to the interpreter.
Yeah, she's saying, I just learned something. I've had some challenging experiences with hearing individuals and interviewing with my resume. My resume, they'll look at my resume and see my experience, and then they'll say I don't have enough experience, and telling me that I need to go find a different fit for that position. So, and that's kind of been surprising for me. So I've learned about that. And what do you do about that?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. So in this case, was it during an interview where that was coming up, where you were getting that feedback?
They were just they were asking me if I had experience in specific situations during an interview, and I didn't. And they said that I needed more, so that that position wouldn't be a good fit. And I just didn't realize that.
Okay.
So I was surprised by that.
Yeah. So I think that in that case, it's good feedback, right? It's data that you're getting from the interviewer. I think that if it were me in that situation, what I would do is at the end of the interview, or potentially after the interview, send an email to the interviewer and say, thank you so much for your time. I understand that I didn't get this position. Please keep me in mind about future opportunities that you have that I might be a good fit for. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing to provide any feedback about skills that you think I could gain in order to be a better fit for this position in the future, right? Or if the interviewer has any feedback about how you could have shown up differently in the interview. And it's not a guarantee that they'll respond. A lot of times people are busy and they don't have time. If they're interviewing a lot of candidates, they might not have time, but it's always worth asking. It's always worth asking for that feedback, because sometimes people do take the time to really help you understand why it wasn't a good fit. And so then you can take that information and you can either practice, you can brush up on the skills that they're asking for, or kind of help you focus your efforts, or you can use that information to then say, okay, I wasn't a great fit for this role for this reason, and now I can pivot, and I think that means I would be a better fit for this role, that's similar but not exactly the same thing. So it can help you guide your job search based on the feedback that you're getting from the interview process.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much for that. Thank you
Sure.
for sharing it.
Of course, yeah.
Ruthie, I believe Sam was willing to participate. If you want
Awesome.
to unmute Sam.
I'm here.
All right, hot seat, Sam. Okay, so what we'll do is I will just ask you a question. I'm going to make it up right now, and then you will get the opportunity to go through a STAR response. Okay. So for everyone else in the audience, what I encourage you to do is think. You can actually, even if you have a piece of paper next to you, a little, sticky note or something, write out S.T.A.R. and see if when Sam's giving their response, you can see if, they're hitting on all of those different parts of the STAR story. Okay. And I will stop sharing my screen so that that's not the main thing we're focusing on. Okay. So, Sam, thanks so much for joining me today at this interview.
It's a
can't
pleasure
wait
to be here.
Can't wait to learn more about you. Okay, so tell me about a time when you had to handle a conflict with someone at work. Could have either a work colleague or a client.
Sure. Before the pandemic, I used to volunteer at a homeless shelter, and my job there was to monitor the people at night to make sure that there was no disturbances, that everybody could get a good night's rest, and to supply any needs over the night. And one night, one of the people staying at the shelter was behaving unusual. She was kind of shouting, and it seemed like she was agitated. So I took her aside, away from the rest of the group, as to not disturb the others, and tried to get a sense of what was going on with her. And I was able to determine through communicating with her that she hadn't been taking her medications.
Mm.
And so in response to that, I tried to talk her down, calm her down, encourage her. And I was just trying to get her through the night. And I called Washington County Mental Health Emergency.
Mhm.
And they guided me a little bit on how to calm her down a little bit. And so she did get to a baseline eventually, and I was
Mhm.
able to bring her back to her sleeping area. However, it started up again maybe a half an hour later, and she ended up waking everybody by throwing her phone across the room and making this loud noise. And I had to respond to that by calling non-emergency police,
Mm.
and they asked for the name of the client, and I gave the name of the client. Initially, they had said that there's nothing that they can do about it legally. However, when they ran her name, they found that she had a warrant for something. They didn't specify what, but so they did come and they took her. Um, I'm not happy that I wasn't able to help her, but I did what I thought was best in order to protect the well-being of all the other people under my care.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so the coding boot camp I used to work with, we used to like clap or like, go Sam, that was so awesome. You put yourself out there on a limb and you really rocked it. That was amazing for just kind of like just, going for it right away without any preparation. So really nice job. And I was looking down here, I was writing my notes, right? And I went through the steps and you did a really awesome job of hitting on all of the different steps of the story. So awesome. Okay, to all the other participants, what would stand out to you about Sam's answer if you were interviewing Sam? What did we learn about Sam through this person's answer? Qualities, think skills, like, character traits. What do we know about Sam? Responsiveness. Yep. So this was something where this sounds like a challenging situation. You really painted the picture of how your client was escalated in this moment, and you were able to, and the sort of potential that had for kind of wreaking havoc, and your responsibility was to keep things, running smoothly. And so you were really responsive and you just jumped right into handling that situation. Tyler says resourceful. I think that's awesome. So one thing that I wrote down is that, Sam, you were not afraid to seek help, right? When it was a situation where you were like, this is a little bit above my pay grade here, I'm not sure exactly what to do. You went right to both the mental health, Washington County mental health, and then you also took it back to the non-emergency police. Okay. So you weren't afraid, you were resourceful in that way, you were seeking out other resources for yourself. Brandy says organized, able to prioritize empathy, right? So I agree. You were focused on, okay, I'm concerned for the well-being of everyone here, and I'm able to kind of like figure out like what's the biggest priority. But you also, it sounded like, really have amazing emotional intelligence and good communication skills, because you were able to talk to someone who was really escalated and understand that this person wasn't on medication, and kind of de-escalate the situation. Yeah, I'm seeing more listened and heard the individual with empathy. Let's see. Oh, and Vicky says this was a volunteer role, showing that he goes the extra mile. Yes. So I think some feedback for you, Sam, is that you could stress that even more, what Vicky's pointing out, right? Before COVID, I had this, I was volunteering, and I think you may have said that, but, I was taking on extra responsibility at a homeless shelter to really help your interviewer understand that was, that you were going above and beyond. I also think that this is an example of sometimes there's a temptation when we're telling a story, and I do this myself, of doing things all in chronological order, and it starts to lose impact, right? If we're like, first this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. So I think that like you did such a good job of setting up the story, talking about how you de-escalated the situation, talking about how you were bringing in different resources to support you. And given some time to practice this, I think you could really hone that so that it was like you're hitting on the specific points that you wanted to address without having to include every single detail. So that's an important point. That's an important reason that we prepare before interviews to make sure that we're including the really important details. I love how you put like your kind of personal reflection into the result part of it, where it sounds like it was a really kind of challenging and sad situation where that person had to be taken away from the shelter. And so to reflect on, like, it wasn't necessarily like positive in the sense like, oh great, everything was hunky-dory and we're all just hanging out, but you were able to demonstrate that you, like what Brandy was saying, that you were prioritizing the well-being of all these other people who were in your care. And that, I think it showed a lot of empathy, that you weren't just like, yep, and then things were fine, right? You were actually like, yeah, that I wasn't totally happy with how things ended. And this is, in a situation like this, if it feels applicable, sometimes you can say like, in the future, if something like this happened again, I would do X, Y, and Z, if you feel like there's something you might do differently in the future. But that was epic. I'm so grateful that you did that. Thanks so much.
Thank you for all your feedback. I appreciate it.
Sure. Okay, so we have a couple more minutes. I didn't save a ton of time for questions, but are there any folks who have lingering questions about S.T.A.R stories?
There was a couple more comments in the chat.
Yeah, I see. Malone said, I have great empathy with how hard it was to choose which parts of the story to tell. Totally. And that is, again, like it helps so much to practice. I've been in healthcare, so my answers are often like Sam's, which require context and an effort to maintain confidentiality. And I struggle to be concise. Yeah, so some of us have been in careers in the past where we can't just disclose everything, right? And you will have to think strategically about, okay, how do I tell this story, or the lesson I learned, or the outcome of the story, what I took away, without saying this person, so-and-so, and giving all of these identifying details. So there's a fine line there where I think you can explain the situation without, breaching that confidentiality. And yeah, Amy, yeah, totally. That willingness to be vulnerable and expressing that the result wasn't what you wanted, but you felt confident it was the best ending based on the resources you had. Totally. Awesome. Cool. Well, I hope that this was a good introduction to how you can use these stories to excel in an interview and help you mitigate some of that anxiety you might be feeling. I will share the link to the document with Grace. And again, that's something that you can make a copy of and then edit to your heart's content. And if for folks, I know it's 11, so if you have to hop off and you want to, feel free. For people who want to stick around, we have the option to go into some breakout rooms, and I will ask you a S.T.A.R question if you want to do some practice with some other participants here. So I'll give people just a moment to hop off.
And then Ruthie, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but I definitely want to thank you so much for your time. And, you gave some wonderful tips, and truly working on the phrasing, getting it down before you ever get to the interview is key on helping you, handle it without a bunch of anxiety and fear. And thank you, job seekers, also for being here. And once again, we do have a job fair coming up October 26th, and hopefully we'll get to see you then. So thank you so much.